questions?
The member for Naparima.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Is the Prime Minister aware that in 2016, several persons have been reported missing in Trinidad and Tobago? And can the Prime Minister advise what specific national security policy has been established by his government to ensure that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service adequately addresses this phenomenon?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this matter of disappearance of our citizens, particularly females, has been with us for quite some time, and we're still hurting from missing persons who we have not accounted for from 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago. And it is a matter of national concern. Only, I think yesterday or the day before, a young lady has disappeared off the pavement in Port of Spain, and that is exercising the attention of the family and the police service at this time. What I could say to the member is that the police service has specific agencies within it that take these reports and take them very seriously and seek to pursue the location of such missing persons. And against the background that any aspect of this troubling development might have international connections, there does exist within the police service a counter-trafficking unit. And this unit has been liaising with agencies of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service to investigate missing persons with a view to exploring all possibilities to find such persons. The counter-trafficking unit has begun to collaborate with key Trinidad and Tobago Police Service agencies in joint sensitization sessions in communities to raise awareness and educate citizens about the warning signs and red flags for human trafficking. These joint community sessions aid in developing communities' trust in law enforcement, and the Trinidad and Tobago agencies are putting some effort into training some specific members of the police service to react to this very unsavory development.
Member for Barataria San Juan, supplemental.
Supplemental, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, could you look into the fact whether the security services throughout Trinidad and Tobago are utilizing an analog or a digital system to connect themselves for these kind of missing persons and these investigations for the security services?
Prime Minister.
Well, I couldn't speak to that specifically, but I'd like to believe that if there's any help to come from that, from technology, that where analog is required or digital, that the service would be making use of that. The Minister of National Security is behind me, and I'm sure he heard you.
Member for Tabakit.
Is it still the policy of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service that when a report of a missing person takes place, that they are telling the family members that they must wait 24 hours before they conduct an investigation or begin a search?
Prime Minister.
There are certain protocols within the police service where that might still be enforced, and some persons in police stations stick to that. But given the nature of the information taken at hand, the senior officers in the stations can and do initiate action before, depending on the nature of the complaint.
Member for Naparima.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Prime Minister, could the Prime Minister confirm whether his government has embarked on or intends to embark on a manpower audit of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service with the assistance of the British government, as has been reported? And if so, can the Prime Minister give an estimate of the cost of this exercise?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, must have been about 3 years ago, as leader of the opposition, I did lead a team to the government of Trinidad and Tobago at the time, pointing out some things that could be done to improve the police service's ability to respond to the criminal element. And one of the things that we outlined then was the requirement for a management audit, meaning determining exactly what manpower we have deployed, the nature, size, scope, and training of that manpower, and whether, in fact, the manpower is deployed in the most effective way. we have been told that that manpower audit was on the way or had been done, but on coming into government in September 2015, we have discovered that not much progress has been made. However, in the intervening period since we have come into office, we have sought the assistance of the British government, who have been very willing to provide us with experts in this area to go and do an audit of the type that we had anticipated. That process is now underway, and there's no cost attached to it at this time, but insofar as there might be reasonable costs attached, when that has become known to us, we'll be quite prepared to pay those reasonable costs, because we do know that such an audit is the foundation before one could make any proper adjustment to the police service and its effectiveness.
Supplemental, Naparima.
Mr. Prime Minister, in choosing to rely on external British resources, are you in fact saying that in 2016, such expertise does not reside locally and should be our first port of call in getting advice?
I'm not saying that at all. Usually matters of this nature, you get the best out of it when you use the local and combine with external.
Member for Caroni East. Supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable Prime Minister, in your request with the British government to assist with this manpower audit, would you consider asking them as well to assist in improving all areas related to detection of criminal activity? Because that seems to be an area which needs a lot of attention.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm very happy to hear that coming from my colleague on the other side, because when we speak, as we do frequently, about our cooperation and collaboration with our external partners, meaning mainly the British, the Canadians, the Americans, that's exactly what we're talking about. And we don't just confine that to manpower work. We are engaged in a series of cooperative actions with these external bodies where we combine our resources with respect to improving our ability to gather information, to train personnel, and to respond to the external threats that challenge all our countries.
Member for Naparima, supplemental.
Mr. Prime Minister, given our past experience with the British assistance in terms of the Scotland Yard who came to Trinidad some decades ago, and the fact that that the objectives were not achieved, and given the fact that they also, I'm aware that they also assisted the St. Lucian government and the objectives were also not achieved, could he give the basis for selecting the British government for assistance?
I am not in a position to imply that the British are not in a position to provide us with the kind of help we need, and the fact that failure attended certain efforts before is no indication that a proper approach and a proper response and a proper exercise will not succeed.
Honourable members, we are just 12 minutes into the session, and it's the third time a mobile device went off. On the first occasion, I gave way because I realized it was the Minister for Local Government and Rural Development, being his first time to the House today. Right? But on the other two occasions, please, it's the third time, please ensure that all mobile devices are switched off. I will now call upon point of prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, could the Prime Minister state the reasons why an agreement between the National Gas Company, Shell, and PDVSA was not signed on December 5th, 2016 in Caracas?
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am prepared to confine myself to what has been signed, and there are a number of agreements going forward that are to be signed as we execute this historic development. So I am not sure what specificity applied to an agreement of December 5th. So if the member wants to speak about what has been signed, I can assist him.
Member for point of prayer.
Thank you,
Next question.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister. To the Honourable Prime Minister, is a recent agreement signed between the government of Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela for the supply of natural gas to Trinidad and Tobago from the Dragon field, subject to approval from the Venezuelan National Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, I'm the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and I can only speak to and for Trinidad and Tobago's involvement in this matter. What goes on in Venezuela is a matter for the Venezuelans, and I cannot speak to what the Assembly is required to do.
Member, hold on. Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Supplemental to the Honourable Prime Minister. This agreement that was signed between the government of Trinidad and Tobago and the government of Venezuela, the national, as you indicated that what was signed is the business of the government of Trinidad and Tobago. But going forward, the people of Trinidad and Tobago would like to know that if there is a change in the administration in the government of Venezuela, will the agreement that was signed between both governments, will it still hold?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, as far as I'm aware, a contract that binds the sovereign state of Venezuela and the sovereign state of Trinidad and Tobago is just that, a contract that binds the sovereigns, and it has nothing to do with which person is in office.
Member for Caroni Central.
Prime Minister, there are two matters that are pertinent in this particular case.
Members, the member has a preamble. I will determine when it is that opportunity arises. Go ahead.
One is the fact that the Congress in Venezuela is controlled by the opposing parties. And the second is decree powers taken under the Constitution by the President does not extend to agreements between countries.
Question, please, member.
As a result, the pertinent question is, are the agreements signed between yourself and the President of Venezuela subject to approval by any entity within Venezuela?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to repeat. The agreement that we have signed by the President of Venezuela, who is the highest executive officer. If there is any breach of Venezuelan authorities or any requirement for Venezuela to have legislative input, that is a matter for the President of Venezuela, who signed on behalf of the government of Venezuela. So I don't know why I'm being quizzed about what Venezuelans are required to do. And may I ask you a question? Is that the reason why your government never made the progress you made yesterday?
Members. Member for Tabakit. Next question, please.
You would understand I cannot respond.
Member for Tabakit. Number 5.
Honourable Prime Minister, in view of the recent signing of this gas supply agreement between the governments of Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela, could you kindly inform this House when the first tranche of gas will be delivered through the proposed pipeline to Trinidad and Tobago?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm very happy that members on the other side are so excited and exercised by this development, because we just signed the foundation agreement at the government-to-government level. It is now for the operational agreements to be concluded and for work to begin on the developmental works of the field and the pipeline and so on. So clearly, I cannot now tell you a date as to when first gas will be here with any certainty. And I certainly will propose no date to you, because I know you will come back after and tell me I did not keep my promise. And I'm in no position now to promise you a particular date. What I can say to you is that with respect to Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela, you would have heard that it is the intention of both countries to have this done at the earliest opportunity. We in Trinidad and Tobago having great interest in an early arrival of first gas. And you also would have seen the President of Venezuela saying in a statement in Caracas that if initially we thought of doing it in 10 months, do it in 5 months. In other words, speed up the arrival of the product to market. And that's the basis on which we are proceeding. But if I may say, the laying of the pipeline, the upgrade of the platform, and the production of the fields into the gas, into Point Lisas, we anticipate, we would be satisfied, let me put it this way, we would be satisfied that we have done very well if within 30 months we do have first gas appearing in Trinidad.
Member for Caroni East.
In the context of the operational aspect of that Venezuela to Trinidad gas supply, would the Honourable Prime Minister indicate which country will be undertaking the expense for that infrastructural work, and what is the estimated cost? So if Trinidad is undertaking it, what is the operational cost for that? If
Prime Minister.
Prepared to answer.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this arrangement is an arrangement between the government of Trinidad and Tobago, represented by the National Gas Company, the government of Venezuela, represented by PDVSA, the Venezuelan National Oil Company, and Shell, a well-known multinational. All costs related to this project between these three parties would be normal commercial costs. And where we are at in this development, I am not in a position to give you any numbers. But as I pointed out at the press conference on Monday evening, that these are expenses that normally will run in the order of hundreds of millions of dollars. We are now getting to the table to determine the exact cost now that we have a foundation to build on.
For the first time ever.
Member for Caroni Central.
Prime Minister, are those the only three entities involved in this particular operation? And if they are, what is the proportionate level of investment?
Member,
proportionate return?
Honourable Member, I would not entertain that question, please. Member for Tabakit, question number 6.
Could the Prime Minister provide specific details relating to the funding of the construction of the 19-mile-long gas pipeline for the Sign Dragon field gas project with Venezuela? Any specific details?
Mr. Speaker, I think that was answered in the supplemental.
Operational. Question number 7. Member for Pointe-a-Pierre.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, given the huge demand of Forex during the Christmas period by businesses both small and large to purchase goods coupled with the prolonged shortage of available foreign exchange, will the Honourable Prime Minister consider temporary restructuring of the distribution of Forex to allow small firms in need to access same during this period to ensure economic activity as well as consumer demand and price stability?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, whether we're talking about small or large users of foreign exchange, this conversation has to be rooted in the fact that there ought to be an understanding that foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago is not as available as it used to, since we have suffered a significant decline in our foreign exchange earning capacity in recent times. That being so, I also want to remind my colleague from Pointe-a-Pierre that it was a tinkering with the distribution of foreign exchange, which at first put us on a road to the creation of a black market here. When in April 2014, I think it was?
Correct.
And once you create a black market, you automatically are living in the shadow of shortages, and vice versa.
Correct.
However, it is very strange that now in the second week of December, we're talking about foreign exchange for Christmas, because the bulk of the foreign exchange required for the Christmas trade would have been occurring before and spent as far back as October. But insofar as there are requirements going forward towards the end of the year, we will still expect that the arrangements in place would permit small, medium, and large businesses to continue to survive within the context of our straitened circumstances.
Member for Tabakit.
From the Prime Minister's response, he is indicating that he believes that there is a black market for foreign exchange. Then, Mr. Prime Minister, why are business organizations allowed to openly put up signs in their business places to buy foreign exchange when, in fact, they are not allowed to do so, and there are certain regulations regarding the legal trading of foreign exchange?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, as far as I'm aware, handling of foreign exchange in Trinidad and Tobago is viewed as a right, as against the law which says the foreign exchange needs to be traded within a particular regulatory arrangements. I am not aware who has her signs up, but if there are any breaches of the law, then it is for the law enforcement agencies to intervene. But it would be burying one head in the sand if one does not accept that foreign exchange is being bought and sold outside of the banks in Trinidad and Tobago.
Member for Point of Pierre, question number 8. Go ahead, member for Baracha Sanwan.
Prime Minister.
Relevant, sir, please. Keep it. Go ahead.
Prime Minister, I just want to ask you if you could, the Minister of Finance is on record of saying that he's going to use the central bank to create a fund and an account to satisfy foreign exchange merchants. You said that. And how far has that reached? And the other thing, could you ask the Minister of Finance to look into the aspects what the banks are doing in order to create loans for interest payments for foreign exchange?
Member.
This is a serious problem.
Member, we are totally, it's not a supplemental directly related to the questions. Okay, right. Okay. Question number 8, member for Point of Pierre.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, in light of Trinidad and Tobago invitation by OPEC to discuss cutting back oil production in line with the policy adopted by OPEC members recently, can the Prime Minister inform this House of the government's position as it relates to this invitation?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in the context of any conversation of Trinidad and Tobago and OPEC, let us start at the beginning where Trinidad and Tobago's application to OPEC was declined on the grounds that we are insignificant. And that was when we were producing 140,000 barrels a day. Now that we are producing 60,000 barrels a day, I find it quite hilarious that a member is raising here with me our presence at an OPEC meeting and talking about cutback. In fact, all of our citizens in Trinidad and Tobago, especially those in the oil sector, are under instructions to increase our production because we need an increased production. However, we are a non-OPEC producer, and so is Russia. So when invitations go out to non-OPEC producers, we get one. But it's not that anybody is listening to what we have to do, because even if we cut back by 10%, it's 6,000 barrels a day. And if the instruction is to cut back by half of 1%, that's 300 barrels a day. So let's not get too excited about that. We are not in a position to influence what goes on out there. However, from a diplomatic standpoint, if we are invited to an OPEC meeting, we will consider attending, even with a watching brief.
Supplemental, member for Carney East.
Prime Minister, in the context of the production of approximately 160,000 barrels per day and your intention to increase the production, can you give us 1,000 barrels per day? 60,000 barrels per day, 60,000. Could you give to the national community an idea of the steps the government is taking to increase this supply
member,
of oil?
A totally different question there, member. We'll now move on to Princestown, question number 10. Number 9, sorry, member for Point of Pierre. My apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister, given the fact that Trinidad and Tobago has been warned that a massive earthquake has been long overdue, could the Prime Minister indicate whether his government intends to establish a national building code to ensure the protection, safety and health of the citizens in the event of a massive earthquake?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this matter of a national building code has been around for decades, and it is what really should concern us is whether we are complying and whether there is adequate enforcement of the building codes. But even against the background of the poor enforcement and the relatively low level of compliance at certain levels, because of the high quality of building materials which are used in Trinidad and Tobago, the overall finished product usually meets above the minimum standards. And where we are doing constructions like larger buildings, multi-story buildings and so on, we usually build to the California code, which is about the highest standard in the world, bearing in mind that we are, in fact, in a seismically active zone. So from that standpoint, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't think that we are at any... But one of the things that I need to point out, I'm happy that members on the other side are now interested, maybe because of the shake yesterday. Because one of the things we found, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is when we attempted to move the Agriculture Ministry from St. Clair into the new building built by the last government, we discovered that it had certain deficiencies with respect to the seismic code, and we had to take steps to retrofit. And of course, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we were going to build the hospital, the famous Couva Hospital, the last government was warned not to build a hospital on the Springvale fault. They did just that. So I'm very happy that they have now come to the point where the building code is important. However, some significant work has been done.
Honourable Prime Minister, you have 2 minutes. Have expired.
Do I have 2 seconds just to assist my...
All right, 2 seconds only. 2 seconds.
We have completed work on the Port of Spain microzonation. San Fernando is being processed, and Scarborough. These are site microzonation works that will put us in a better position to respond to earthquakes.
Member for Princestown, question number 10.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, through you to the Honourable Prime Minister. In light of the Prime Minister's recent statements regarding the aluminum smelter, could the Prime Minister indicate to this House when will public consultations commence on this project?
Prime Minister.
Mr. President, Mr. Vice, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wish my colleague from Princestown would pay more attention to what is happening in the House. Because the only comment I made recently about an aluminum smelter is to make it crystal clear to every citizen that this government is not pursuing an aluminum smelter. Aluminum smelting involves the use of bauxite or alumina in machinery to generate aluminum ingots. All the recent statements I've made were very clear, made in English, in and out of this House, that what the government of Trinidad and Tobago is pursuing is an aluminum industry, if found to be economically sound, based on the importation of aluminum ingots. You only get aluminum ingots after you've smelted bauxite or aluminum. So this question has no place being associated with any statement of mine. We are not pursuing an aluminum smelter.
It's embarrassing.
Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Would the Prime Minister please indicate the name and designation of the Minister who currently chairs the Finance and General Purposes Committee of Cabinet?
Right, let him go ahead.
Number 11.
Yes, go ahead. You continue with your question, sir. Yeah. Member, sorry.
What's that?
Question number 12 to you.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think I'm being tricked. I'm programmed to answer the questions in sequence. So when you skip, I'm not...
Proceed.
Which one are you on?
Number 12.
Number 12, the name and designation of the minister. Oh, with pleasure. The minister who chairs the Finance and General Purposes Committee of the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago is Honourable Minister Stuart Young, Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister and Minister in the Office of the Attorney General.
Number 11.
Follow-up.
Supplemental.
Is it... Prime Minister, would you say it's normal for the Minister of Finance not to chair the Finance and General Purposes Committee?
All depends on what is normal for you. What is normal for you might not be normal for me.
Supplemental. Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Prime Minister, isn't it the accepted protocol in governance that the Minister of Finance chairs the Finance and General Purposes Committee?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I don't know what experience they're referring to. But I have been in the cabinet where Dr. Seth was never the Minister of Finance, but he chaired FNGP for 5 years. Speak for yourselves and your misgovernance. The PNM does not follow your template.
Member for Princestown.
Stuart is a new Lenny.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, through you to the Honourable Prime Minister, could the Prime Minister indicate whether he has visited the residents of Matlot and Grand Riviere in light of the natural disaster that occurred in those communities last week?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I have not personally visited the community of Brasso Seco, Matlot or Grand Riviere. But however, I am pleased to announce that given the problems faced as natural disaster on the Wednesday, the 30th of November, by the following morning of Thursday, the Minister of Works was in the area and the Minister of Local Government, and since then both ministers have made, along with the Member of Parliament, 2 visits. As I speak to you now, I could report that on the very same day of Thursday following the night's event, the Defence Force was mobilized along with the Sandy Grande Corporation and ODPM, and by Friday the 2nd, a motion was dealt with in this House where the Minister of Works comprehensively outlined the government's response. As I speak to you now, the Member of Parliament for Arima is in Brasso Seco, and there have been a number of other developments where Trinidad and Tobago has responded fairly adequately, but always there's room for all kinds of improvements. But we have responded, and we are bringing continuous relief to our citizens on the North Coast.
Member for Princestown, supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Honourable Prime Minister, in light of the concerns raised by residents in those areas, together with the Member of Parliament herself, about the timing in terms of the response from the essential services, are you satisfied with the level of response provided in terms of the time as expressed by residents and also the member for Toko Sandy Grande in terms of not being as forthcoming as it should be?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the state's response to our colleagues, our fellow citizens on the North Coast, has been the subject of public information on a continuous basis. Given the nature of the emergency, I want to congratulate all the agencies that responded. And while there's always room for improvement, because the only perfect situation is to be there at the moment when it happens, the bottom line is that we gave a response of which the country can be proud. And if there's room for improvement, we'll seek to make those improvements as we go along.
Members, the Prime Minister's question time has expired, but I will entertain the member for Princestown on his supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Honourable Prime Minister, in light of your announcement with respect to the member for Arima visiting Brasso Seco, can you indicate whether or not it is your position or you are satisfied that a member of your government, a member of Parliament who has a natural disaster in his constituency, did not make the sufficient time to visit or to provide what is needed for his constituents and instead saw it more important to attend a ministerial meeting in Barbados and not even visit his constituency?
Question, please, now, member.
Whether or not the Prime Minister is satisfied with that response from a member of Parliament that belongs to his government.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, satisfaction by response to our citizens, the government of Trinidad and Tobago is a unit as a whole, and insofar as the member of Parliament per se has not been there, he gave a reason, and in fact he's on his way there. And secondly, the rest of the government, as I just outlined, responded at great timeliness.
Honourable members, the Leader of Government Business has extended the time for Prime Minister's question. So I'll now call on member for Caroni Central, question number 13.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Would the Prime Minister indicate who was the chief negotiator for the government of Trinidad and Tobago with Mitsubishi and the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, JBIC, and where these negotiations took place?
Minister.
Only for the parliamentary records. Let us just make sure that we put it on the record that the House approved the extension and not the leader of government business.
Members, all in agreement?
Yes.
Aye. Okay, the ayes have it. Kindly proceed.
Repeat the question, please.
Sorry, I'll repeat. Would the Prime Minister indicate who was the chief negotiator for the government of Trinidad and Tobago with Mitsubishi and Japan Bank for International Cooperation, JBIC, and where these negotiations took place with regard to the renegotiation of the Mitsubishi arrangement?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this matter came to the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago in 2015 at the location of the Office of the Attorney General. And it involved State Company National Gas Company along with the private sector in Trinidad and Tobago and Japan and the government of Japan. In responding to the development of the requirement to intervene to protect the project and our national interests, the Cabinet Subcommittee, chaired by the Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, along with Professor Ken Julian, advisor to the Prime Minister, Professor Andrew Jupiter, Petrotrin, Chairman of Petrotrin and member of the Board of NGC, and Mr. Jerry Brooks, Chairman of NGC. That subcommittee was authorized by the Cabinet to address this matter. The discussions, if they may be called negotiations, took place in Trinidad and Tobago and in Tokyo. And as was said to this House by way of statement of the Minister, it was indicated that we did, in fact, have success at the end of those negotiations.
Could I, Carney Central.
Yeah, could I ask Prime Minister who was the lead negotiator?
Prime Minister.
I just indicated
You said
that,
the committee, sir.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm going to answer questions, but I'm not going to take challenges that are not accurate. I started off by saying that the matter came to the Office of the Attorney General and a team led by the Minister in the Office of the Attorney General and the Office of the Prime Minister, the Honourable Stuart Young. He led a team, Professor Julian, Professor Jupiter, Mr. Jerry Brooks. That was the team of a Cabinet subcommittee to respond, right? And on that basis, discussions took place in Trinidad and Tobago and in Japan, and out of that came a satisfactory agreement.
Okay, so
Supplemental. Carney Central.
yes, follow-up supplemental. So I appreciate, Prime Minister, that Minister Young was the lead of that team. Are you satisfied, Honourable Prime Minister, that based on the negotiations, that NGC as a corporation has not been put under greater commercial and financial risk?
Member, I'm not going to entertain that question. Your next question, member for Carney Central, question number 14.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, would the Prime Minister indicate whether the renegotiation of arrangements between National Gas Company and Mitsubishi Massey, that's the two corporations involved in the private sector side, have altered the original business model on which the first agreement was premised?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, this particular question is addressing a statement which has already been made in this Parliament. Had I not been satisfied as head of the government, and had this government not been satisfied, we would not have come here and told the Parliament that we have changed what was there to something that is acceptable to all parties and is now signed, and work is proceeding apace without let or hindrance. And insofar as there is any alteration of any model, it is altered to the benefit of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Because in a statement to this House, we told the House why we changed it. We changed the exposure of NGC in a debt buy-down arrangement for no benefit, and we told the House that there were objections by the public service to what was there. What is there now is that NGC has no liability to pay without benefit, And also worse, the government has rescinded a national gas policy which says that in the event of a shortage of gas, only the new companies will get and the older contracts will not get. And we pointed out, had that been allowed to stand, NGC as the supplier of gas would have been exposed to billions of dollars in claims from those older existing contracts which would not have been satisfied because the government would have entered into this mad policy of saying that if gas is available, it only goes to companies prior to 2014. We have changed that. And if that is the business model that we have altered, we've altered it with sanity in mind.
Member for Tabakit, question number 15.
Honourable Prime Minister, could you please state whether any monetary claims for work done have been received by the government from OAS Constructora on the Point 14 highway following the termination of the contract?
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I'm very happy for this question because I was trying to figure out where the answer would come from. Because it is strange to us in the government that we have terminated OAS Constructora after no claim was made to us leading up to the closure. And in fact, when this claim, as described by the member for Tabakit, came to us, we were in shock. Because had we by mistake or any other happenstance paid that claim, which had no basis, what that claim was meant to do was to undermine the government's attempt to cash in the letter of credit. Fortunately for us, we picked up the attempt to dupe the government into paying a claim that was not payable, and had we made that payment, we would have lost our legal standing in claiming the $1 billion that we've claimed in the courts of London. Thank God we were on the ball and that we were sufficiently alert. And I would simply like to ask my colleague from Tabakit, who generated that claim?
Supplemental. Member for Tabakit.
Mr. You just referred to the $1 billion you said you got back in claims and so on. Does that include retention monies?
Why are you not answering? It's a foolish question.
Prime Minister.
Mr.
Members.
Speaker, Mr. Deputy Speaker, out of deference to you, I am going to put this on the record so that my colleagues will not continue to mislead the public. It was said by statement in this House that these were bonds, standby letter of credit bonds, had nothing to do with claims and retention. And the minister is asking that question and is causing me great concern. The member for Tabakit, we came to this House, we told the public outside, these were letter of credit standby bonds, which in the event of a failure of the contract, this was the recourse. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, these questions are to be viewed in the context of the minister's oversight of the removal from that contract of the member. The removal from that contract of the clause that allowed the state to fire the contractor for bankruptcy. I'm drawing it to the national population's attention that these questions are linked to that withdrawal of that clause in that contract.
Supplemental. Member for Tabakit.
The Prime Minister refers to Addendum 2. Has the Prime Minister read Addendum 2 to see how it also protected the interests of Trinidad and Tobago?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there can be no protection for the people of Trinidad and Tobago if we are giving up the opportunity to get rid of a contractor, to terminate a contract because the contractor has become bankrupt. If it was the last government's policy to be comfortably in bed with a contractor that is bankrupt, it is not this government's policy and it is not in the interest of Trinidad and Tobago at any time.
Member for Tabakit, question 16.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Honourable Prime Minister, could you inform the House whether your government has awarded any contracts to local contractors for the completion of the highway to Point 14? And if so, who are the contractors and for which segments have contracts been awarded?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the government has made it quite clear that having terminated the contract with OAS, we are under the guidance of legal counsel to determine what is the state of play on the ground. We are assessing the work on the ground. We are assessing the legal requirements for a certain thing, and as soon as we have been given clearance by the legal advisors, the government's intention is to return to the project and to award contracts in a number of subunits. It is our intention to hire more than one contractor to do various segments of the highway, giving local contractors the opportunity to get involved in the project and so on. To date, we have not awarded any contract, but we are working towards that situation.
Correct. Supplemental, Tabaki.
Honourable Prime Minister said, are those contracts to be awarded going to include contracts for the segment between Debe and Mondesi?
I want to repeat, we are assessing the situation on the ground, and based on the completion of that assessment, we will determine what segments and what contracts are awarded.
Member for Naprima, supplemental.
Continuous response about assessing the situation. When will you get down to specifics and action?
Unlike the previous government that awarded the contract without proper assessment, this government will get down when the assessment makes sense and we know exactly what we are doing to protect the public interest.
Last supplemental, Naprima.
Prime Minister, are you guaranteeing the people of Point 14 a highway and a hospital in the immediate future?
Member, I would not entertain that question.